I'm going to talk about today, and to kind of warm up the day and get us going, is I'm going to talk about how to prevent digital totalitarian states. I'm going to talk about how these might rise, what the current powers might be, and what we should be solving for. It is not a given that we're going to land in these kinds of things. It would be great to avoid it, but it is a definite possibility, and a lot of technologies are empowering these kinds of structures. So thinking about this kind of thing, I like always going back to 1984 because it has a very good mimetic power in terms of, in people's minds, what a society with huge amounts of power and control over society, how that society behaves. If you go back and read the book, it is super tame. Like, technology plays almost no role. It is primarily social. And so when you reason about 1984, like, the technologies at play are maybe like, hey, the TV in your room is owned and can look at you, and maybe there's some amount of surveillance in CCTV. And it's just like the prediction relative to where we are now, or not necessarily prediction, but that model is just so tame with what's possible today. So if we were to write, George Orwell's 2024, our 2024, what would that look like? And so I'm going to take us through that in a bit. Just to give you, to have a little bit of a claim to why I know what I'm talking about, I've spent most of the last 10 years working on a set of technologies to prevent these kinds of systems, these kinds of problems, IPFS and libp, which are tools designed for a much better internet infrastructure that can give us a certain level of safety and human rights. So human rights is a huge focus of our work, and we try to create structures that protect civil rights globally, or give people the tools to protect civil rights globally. It's not a given that distributed technologies actually do that and help you. It just empowers the people locally to make better decisions, and it gives an asymmetric advantage. I think everyone here working on Web3 initially got inspired by that kind of vision, initially got inspired by bringing in those kinds of rights. And I think that Web3 has an enormous amount of potential in achieving this sort of thing. Some of the tech that we've built we're so no strangers to censorship that we were involved in many events. Our technologies got involved in many events relating to censorship. So what are modern Orwellian states? What could be built? Then we'll talk about how to prevent them. Then after that, we'll talk about building global secure communications. I probably don't have to convince most people here that totalitarianism is bad, but to put things in perspective, think of completely locking down some society and preventing any kind of shift out of totalitarianism, but also just kind of when you weigh it by the horrible deaths involved, you just kind of end up in a just terrible outlook. Now, like, what's new in 2024? So first off, telecommunications globally have drastically improved since 1984. We have now the internet for most of our interactions. We have about 7 billion smartphones deployed. We have CCTV basically in most cities, in certainly most places of transit. Any kind of hubs for moving around are full of CCTV. We have satellite imagery globally. You have very good resolution in those, pretty quick updates. We have a fully digital economy that could enforce policies and rules, which, if you suddenly are disliked by your local system and prevented from moving around, taking some public transportation, buying food, water, whatever, this could get a little hairy. And of course, AI is going to make all of this kind of stuff way harder. Think of levels of all of that massive surveillance needs to be analyzed by somebody. Humans are not exactly the best at this. Computers are extremely good at it. So think of all that object recognition stuff that we looked at. Now deploy it at massive scale, being able to then guide behavior and policy. You can build and deploy automated systems of control. You can have behavioral ML models. We're going to talk a little bit more about AI because since I gave the first version of this talk earlier this year, there's been a set of improvements worth including. I mentioned surveillance, but just to put things into perspective, we have lots of evidence that many organizations around the world are monitoring all traffic, metadata, and the content phones, GPS, positions, audio, video, communications data, health data, all of that kind of stuff. If you're like me and you really like tracking your biometrics, you have one of these devices and you take all of your data and you give it to the cloud in the clear. And so, probably several corporations that right now have a full biometric model of me and can predict how I move and so on. Other corporations have full models of what I say online and can predict what I'm likely to say. Not a good position, not a good outlook. Then, beyond that, we have all of our communications and social media. Like, just all of this is mediated through currently still corporations and subject to a lot of local policies. We've had evidence of a bunch of propaganda problems, control of news, publications, and so on, disinformation, and if you think about modern computing and the ability to generate content today, and kind of coordinate, and if you have a system that is producing content, optimizing for some goal, and is measuring the reactions of people, that can run off in a pretty terrible way. You should pay attention to what happens in the next US election. That'll be a really interesting testbed for a lot of this kind of stuff. Hopefully nothing really bad happens. Hopefully hopefully good will prevail and a lot of this won't come to pass. But it'll be an interesting place because people are certainly going to try. Then we have things like if you have all of these computing systems and you can control a lot of robots and so on in computers, you can also do the same thing with humans. You can measure the behavior, you can create some incentives, and you can couple the surveillance system with a control system. We're starting to see the beginnings of this kind of thing being deployed. We have the social credit systems in a few places in the world. These are like super tame right now. They haven't been really weaponized. And one of the things that I think is crucial to enabling this kind of control to happen is that these things get implemented and then just make everything better. If these systems come in contact with a country, they make everything better for years. Everyone learns to love these things. They're like, oh man, like the world just got so much better after these social credit systems. More and more societies will just grant control to these things over time. A decade or a couple decades in, the administration's transition, somebody starts rewriting the rules in the algorithms, and boom, now you have a really bad situation. One of the key things here is most administrations in the world today tend to want to protect people, tend to be pretty well-intentioned. We have had a relative level of peace compared to other parts of history. And so usually those administrations are trying to be defensive and implementing extremely bad systems that are going to be taken advantage of by successors. Like, this is classic history. Like, just go back and read about the histories of the worst kind of police systems got usually implemented with very good intentions. Then we have things like automated enforcement of situations, right? So not just incentives. We have robot swarms coming, right? Like this stuff is gonna get nasty. But this is about censorship, so we won't dive too deep into this. Promised AI edition. So a lot of stuff has changed. We have, again, massive surveillance and data analysis. We can generate an enormous amount of media. LLMs are just tremendously powerful. Just try playing around with them. It's amazing. You can generate and summarize all kinds of content. You can, we have enough computing power to just observe and write for all humans, right? So the computing power available to major corporations and to nation states is sufficient to just generate, to observe all streams of communication coming out of a human and write back to the human. That's insane. How do you even fight that? We have to bake in protective systems. By the way, this is the first part of the talk. We're going to be very optimistic towards the end. Don't worry. And then, think of new things. Like, we'll have new economic structures, new control structures. We'll have preventative control models for are you likely to dislike the state in a year? Should we prevent you, cut that early? And this isn't even touching AGI, right? That's way out of scope for this talk. In that, it's coming. People predict it's going to come in the next 2 to 5 years. So, very out of scope for today. But if you want to wrap your head around this, think of anything a human can do at a clock speed 1,000 times faster, fully connected to the internet. That's, think of that, that's sufficient. Of course, these systems are going to get better, so problems. So how could these, so we've talked about the capabilities. How could the totalitarian systems rise? Usually, there are a few different ways, but usually they tend to rise in the name of public safety, whether it's from dictatorships after some upheaval, or democracies where something bad is happening, and so groups tend to vote in all kinds of safety measures. The Patriot Act in the US is a very good example of this. Eventually, even though those administrations could be super well-intentioned and trying to do what's best for everyone, by creating infrastructure with that level of power, eventually someone bad is going to look at that level of power, plot how to take over, do it, and then implement a really terrible system. You just have to pick up a history book to see lots of examples. Now, practically, what this means is implementing pieces of these systems, demonstrate that they're really good for everybody, get everyone to love them and want them to spread, and increase that distribution. Over time, you keep up ratcheting power and control, and eventually someone will come along and take over. So, great, we've talked about the problem. How do we prevent these terrible things? So there's a lot of different ways. You need a full combination of approaches. Primarily, you need a super well-educated public that understands the potential, that has reliable media. This is where censorship resistance is really critical. You need schools and learning, and you need humans to be very well aware of what's possible here. You need extremely good policies in government. You need balanced government structures, very strong institutions that can prevent this kind of takeover, very strong institutions that are red teaming problems and trying to nip things in the bud before they become an issue. We also need extremely strong technological powers. We need extremely secure communications. This means, again, censorship resistance to enable all of us to coordinate, but also privacy, reader-writer privacy. Being able to coordinate requires the ability to coordinate in private so that you can't be taken out by some would-be totalitarian controller. And this usually gets forgotten. The economic loop here is extremely crucial. You need a very strong economy to prevent these massive upheavals that tend to give instability to governments. But more importantly, from my perspective, you need a very strong economy to stay ahead of the curve in the technological stream, to be able to implement all these technologies with human rights at the forefront, instead of lagging behind others and then letting others kind of implement their control structures on you. I won't go super deep into this because it's a little bit out of scope for today. But the world has hundreds of democracies. There's very strong institutions. Most of them really want to prevent this. Most of them really, really are aware of these kinds of problems and want to prevent them. But there is this big debate in all of them between security and privacy. There are very real short-term practical problems with security, and that usually gets used by the would-be implementers of these kinds of apparatus. So the world has used, thankfully, the Cambridge Analytica problem gave us a very good example to use now to talk about these problems, to implement safeguards. So this is, no matter what government you're in and so on, bring this kind of thing up and, yeah, fight for this kind of stuff. Now, I want to mention that privacy is not a great brand. It tends to be dismissed as optional. It does not convey the real problem. We as a community of builders, going back to the 50s and so on, missed up here. It's not about privacy. It's not about keeping what you're doing secret from other people. That's not at all what is going on. We're trying to establish security. Secure communications is what we're talking about. Being able to coordinate securely as a people. That's what we're orienting for. And so really whenever you kind of think about privacy and so on, really strongly mention security, because that's, at the end of the day, it's about two forms of security. Short-term security in terms of current problems, or long-term security in terms of how your civilization is able to prevent these kinds of problems. There's a lot of good progress to highlight. There were the original crypto wars, strong encryption standards. They always come up for, people always try to get rid of them, but we have so far been pretty successful. There are really good proposals against AI-biased systems. We need to go hard on this, stay ahead of the curve here. And I think in general, we just have lots of groups fighting super hard to prevent these kind of problems. Huge kudos to tons of people around the world that have worked super hard to enable this. Great, so this is a technology conference, so let's get back to that. I'll dive very deep into secure communications in a moment. Just think about it in terms of we need secure communications, talking and writing to each other, in order to properly coordinate so that we can take significant actions and prevent these kinds of problems. And so the basic foundation that I want everybody here to walk away with is that we need global secure communications. Censorship resistance, reader-writer privacy. Any human in the world should have the right to communicate with any other human in the world securely and privately, and in groups. So again, I talked about the economy. I won't dive super deep into that, but just the economy is what lets you coordinate large groups of people. It lets you build the technologies that you need, and it lets you take actions. Cool, so let's dive into secure communications. I'm gonna give like a view into the internet infrastructure, lots of applications and hardware and so on, and I'll kind of hint at a roadmap of what we need to do. So at the very bottom, this is not typical in the blockchain space. We tend to operate kind of like on top of the internet, and the internet is this big black box that we don't think about. Oh yeah, just send packets to each other, right? It'll just work out. Absolutely not. Censorship happens at a lower layer. We need to improve the entire IP stack. We need to bring censorship not just into blockchains, but sink it all the way down into the basic building blocks of the internet. We need proper communication protocols that are able to have censorship resistance directly in the routers, in how your computer connects to the internet, and so on. We need to make this a human right. Like, it's not going to be easy to implement this globally. We need the UN and other groups behind these kinds of policies. We need things like secure systems like Tor, I2P, and like the new mixnets like NIM and so on. I want to call those out as like really good efforts. But we need something that's going to scale to the billions and tens of billions or hundreds of billions of devices that we're going to have. A lot of these systems are really good for small use cases, and they're really good to like give us something to work with and scale. But what we need to be targeting is something that's going to work for tens of billions to hundreds of billions of devices communicating a lot. So when you think about protocols, really target that, because if you're going to spend 3 to 5 years designing a protocol and implementing it, and 5 years in, you're like, hey, great, like you got 100 million things to communicate privately. Awesome, that's a really great progress. But there's a huge gap there. Then kind of if we manage to getting censorship resistance and privacy at this layer is extremely difficult. It's going to be hard to start here. We need to make progress on this, but it's an area that is difficult to get to. One thing I would recommend folks here is create large-scale incentivized routing systems. So use blockchains to build large-scale incentivized routing systems in the clear at first and get them to work and get them to scale. Then you can bring in the censorship resistance and the privacy, reader-writer privacy later. But just showing that you can build a massive scale routing system that works globally, internet-wide, would be a great plus. And then cell networks and other kinds of routing and satellite and whatnot would be really useful. It'd be great to have like a decentralized Starlink type of thing. That would be super valuable. That would enable us to really communicate with a lot of people around the world. Cool. So DNS is one really strong Achilles heel in some of the things that I mentioned before. This was usually a lot of states tend to attack DNS because that's, if you can't find the content and you don't know where to go, tough luck. Even though you could theoretically communicate to the right computer, you can't find it. So DNS is like this place, the Achilles heel that you can like cut in terms of how people find things. This is where things like blockchain naming are really useful. Things like ENS and so on are extremely valuable in terms of ratcheting this up. But most of those systems still use the traditional routing infrastructure. We need the naming system, especially for really sensitive names, to be able to be spread out and distributed to lots of devices so you can load things locally without having to depend on some registry later that could be blocked. We need to radically improve the internet, the CA system. So in blockchains, we thankfully use much better cryptographic systems, but most of the internet and most of the places where we get our software are still using the CA system. So great, you have a great blockchain, awesome, kudos. If you can't get the right software, and the software that you can get is owned by somebody attacking the CA system, tough luck. You now have a vulnerability, and like you won't be able to do what you wanted anyway. So we really need to take the magical crypto systems that we have and rewrite and improve how our browsers get content in the first place. We need a way better web that has censorship resistance baked in. This is stuff that a lot of us have been working on, and we've made an enormous amount of progress. Still a ton to go. We need this stuff to work on every native browser, and we need it to work at scale for all kinds of applications. Right now it works really well for static content and so on. I mean, lightly dynamic content, but it doesn't yet scale to something like a social network. That, though you could do it in practice, it doesn't work well enough to really spread. That's a major area of focus for these projects. We really need browsers to be very strong privacy-oriented. We need hooks for routing systems, for naming systems, for certificate authorities, for other loading systems that load other content, systems that load applications, all of that kind of stuff. The browsers and the operating systems are these key entry points where if you can hook in there, then you can distribute much better infrastructure. App stores are a huge problem right now because Android's a little bit better than Apple, but these are basically super locked-in environments where you can't distribute whatever you want onto these things. They're super controlled in terms of geopolitical structures, and so we need some way of having the control over the mobile phones' networking systems directly from decentralized app store type of environments. I'm not sure if Android enables this right now. It might, because Android has like a much healthier open source orientation, but I know certainly Apple does not let you install anything you want. You can only install what Apple wants. And I'm a use Apple devices all the time, but this is a huge problem, and they should improve. They should know better. Then you want to think about like the different modes of communication, and for each of these modes, make sure that you have a really good, awesome product that everyone loves, that is secure by default, that has censorship resistance, that has reader-writer privacy, one-to-one communications, one-to-many, many-to-one, many-to-many kinds of things. You can imagine all the, think of any application that you use for communicating with other people, Telegram, Signal, email, text messages, forums, whatever. You should have an alternative that works really well, that is beautiful and wonderful to use, that has censorship resistance and privacy, reader-writer privacy baked in. And kind of even I would encourage starting with very simple things. So like the fact that we have Signal and being able to do one-to-one or small group communications already is a huge plus. The metadata is still observable by attackers. You can correlate who's messaging who and so on. If you're observing the links, that needs to get way better. And then, on top of all this, think of like much more complex applications. Once you have economies and organizations and whatnot, you want to enable those things to ride on top of these kinds of systems. Eventually, it would be great to get to secure communications hardware. The problem here is that there's very few vendors that can produce the really high quality stuff. This means an enormous amount of lock-in. The good news there is that there's a lot of there's a strong orientation towards democracies and civil rights, which is awesome. We need to work towards getting more vendors and getting these systems to open up so that you can run whatever you want in them. And I'll give a plug here for research and development in general. So one of the things I love about the crypto community is that we read all the amazing cryptography papers and we're like, oh my god, this is amazing. Why don't we have this deployed? And old cryptographers were like, when you deploy new cryptography, it's bound to break and never works. And that led to this massive slowdown in cryptography, so new things weren't getting deployed and developed. We're like, hey, let's take these magical tools, deploy them at scale, and if they break, we'll fix them. And let's use them to generate an enormous amount of wealth that we then will loop back into the R&D cycle to make even more cryptography and even more systems, and that has been amazing. So from a perspective of what is the thing that has happened in the last 15, 20 years that has been the most promising for secure communications, it's the rise of the crypto community. Like the cryptocurrency community is feeding the entire cryptography community and accelerating the research into zero-knowledge proofs, into fully homomorphic encryption, into just secure communications in general, distributed systems, and so on. So we need to double down on this. It'd be great if blockchains in general started devoting a huge fraction of their significant fraction of their wealth directly to this kind of R&D, funnel emission of tokens directly into funding R&D of this kind of stuff. You'll hear me talk a lot about that over the next coming years. There's really great new tech frontiers. A lot of the speakers here are going to talk about this stuff. Zero knowledge proofs is all the rage right now. Awesome. Not good enough for certain kinds of things. I think things like fully homomorphic encryption are going to be critical. These are going to become much more widely deployed and important in the next 5 years, so keep an eye out for that. There's a lot of work to do there. I think that these things can be used for routing for all communications, for all messages, for all kind of normal human communications. So it sounds crazy, but when you think about the number of thoughts and messages that a human can output, within 10, 20 years, we'll have enough computing power to run all of that in secure communications fully with perfect cryptography. So don't worry too much about things being way too slow. that's just wrong. Just wait, wait a few years. It'll get way, way, way better. And like I mentioned, the innovation cycle, we need successful projects to scale, to generate a lot of wealth so that we can feed that back into R&D. And I just want to kind of end with a huge congratulations to the entire ecosystem, because overall, we've made an enormous amount of progress in the last few decades, especially from my perspective in the last decade. We did that on the shoulders of lots of giants that fought the crypto wars, gave us basic cryptography, highlighted all these problems. But I want to kind of remind everyone that we need both production-grade infrastructure and software for lots of different use cases, and you want to find things that are going to be really important, and you want to make sure that you have a beautiful, wonderful product that everyone wants to use. A lot of us use and love Telegram because it's just so nice and really useful, but I don't think the whole thing is open source, and without knowing that the whole thing is open source and secure and so on with like really good cryptography, I can't trust it. And instead, Signal is like a little bit of a ratchet better, but not dramatically better still, because you can't, I think you can't run all of your own instances. I think some of the, like again, it still relies on the app stores, which kind of suck. And it's still, I mean, you have to go through the app stores, but you should offer alternative ways of communicating, and the metadata is kind of in the clear. But again, super great that we have those things, and all of these things need to get better. And we have a really good innovation cycle. It's really special that the cryptocurrency community has this entire thing going. We need to scale it. But just as you head into the conversations today, know that this is a long road. It's a long fight here. We have a long way to go to we're fully Orwellian proof and digital totalitarianism proof. We've had an enormous amount of successful progress. We need to double down on it and scale it. We're in a dramatically better place today than we were 5 years ago or 10 years ago. We have magical internet money. We have much more secure names. We have much more secure ways of communicating our applications and our web pages and so on. We have pretty good censorship persistence relative to where we were 10 years ago. But we have so much more to do. And so I really hope that the people in the room are going to sign up to come build these human right protecting technologies and help us all live in a much, much safer and much, much better future. Thank you very much.